Welcome, Klaudia Majcher. Thank you for joining us today. You have recently edited the report titled Charting the Digital and Technological Future of Europe, What Priorities for the European Commission in 2024-2029. Could you tell me more about this project?
So thank you so much, Julia, for this conversation. So indeed, in December, we published an extensive policy report about the digital and technological priorities for the next EU leadership. And this report is based on a significant collaborative effort. So it involved over 20 researchers working at the EUI on the digital transformation. And in the report, we addressed a number of important digital policy topics, including competition, innovation, platform regulation, emerging technologies such as AI, data policy, media and democracy, and geopolitics, among others. And each contribution to this report is a short think piece that translates academic ideas into concrete and actionable policy recommendations.
Wow, that's really impressive. Could you tell me more about the rationale behind this project?
So there were three main reasons behind this project. And the first has to do with the current political moment in the EU. So in June, a new European Parliament was elected. In December, a new European Commission took office. And this means a fresh policy and legislative cycle and new digital priorities and initiatives. So we wanted to contribute to this conversation about the digital future of Europe. Which brings me to the second reason. So designing good digital policies requires a collaborative and inclusive dialogue between the academia and policymakers, legislators, and the society. It is also an important role of universities to foster this social and political engagement. And I think this project quite well aligns with this mission. And the third aim of this initiative was to bring together the EUI academic community, so professors, fellows, and associates, working on the digital transformation. So the report is really interdisciplinary. The contributing researchers come from very different academic fields and methodological approaches. They also work in different units of the EUI, so the Robert Schuman Center, the Department of Law, the Department of Economics, and the Florence School of Transnational Governance. So the report consolidates this expertise from across the EUI, creates synergies, and shows the depth and breadth of digital scholarship undertaken at our institute.
Indeed, I think it's really nice seeing so many EUI academics coming together to share their knowledge on these important topics. I wanted to zoom in on digital regulation. In the past policy cycle, the European Commission has enacted several groundbreaking regulations, including the Artificial Intelligence Act, the Digital Markets Act, the Digital Services Act, and more. Now, with this impressive toolbox in place, what should the next priority be for the European Commission?
So indeed, as you said, the European Union in the past few years has enacted a number of ambitious and important digital regulations. But one of the significant recommendations or important recommendations in this report was in this policy cycle for Europe to pause, to introduce a kind of regulatory moratorium and to focus on effective monitoring, implementation, and enforcement. In the next few years, it will also be important for Europe to understand how these different pieces of legislation overlap, whether there are any inconsistencies between them, and reflect on how to ensure regulatory coherence. And here a good example is the expanding body of European data law, which consists of different newly enacted pieces of legislation, such as the Data Governance Act, the European Data Act, but also the Digital Markets Act, the Digital Services Act, the AI Act, all of which regulate certain aspects of data and all of which overlap to a certain extent and will need to interact with the General Data Protection Regulation. So it will be important for the enforcers responsible for these different pieces of legislation to collaborate closely to ensure a cohesive European data policy. It was also recommended that the EU in the coming years should evaluate which new regulatory provisions are working in practice and which are not. And in order to assess what's effective on the ground, the European Commission will need to invest in monitoring capabilities and be ready to make adjustments if and as necessary. A broader recommendation put in another contribution to this report was for European policy making and digital making to become a more reflective and deliberate and thoughtful process. So policymakers, lawmakers need to prioritize reflection over speed and avoid falling into action bias.
That's an interesting point about the need for a reflective approach. Another recurring theme is the interplay between digital innovation and democratic values. And this is especially relevant for media policy. Now, what ideas does the report share about how to ensure a safer, well-functioning media and information ecosystem?
Thank you for the question. So the colleagues who contributed on the topic of media and democracy highlighted how large digital platforms have a significant influence over media, over public discourse, and that this will need to be more effectively addressed in order to create a pluralistic media landscape. And to do this, the European Commission will, for example, need to perhaps reassess its platform regulation from a constitutional point of view. And this includes ensuring that the interpretation of certain fundamental values, fundamental principles, such as freedom of speech or media pluralism, is not the task of large online platforms, as currently envisaged, for example, in the Digital Services Act. Other recommendations here included making systemic investments in the media sector, enabling new business models in order to reduce the dependence of publishers on large online platforms, and re-establishing fair economic relationships between content creators and large platforms. It was also recommended that European Union should better integrate media and journalism in its policy framework against disinformation.
Another important element is the geopolitical and geoeconomic dimension of digital policy. So how can the new Commission navigate digital policy in this increasingly complex geopolitical dimension and context we are living in?
So here, one of the key recommendations put forward by the colleagues was for Europe to strengthen its digital autonomy, digital sovereignty. And in particular, the European Commission should acknowledge that realize that there are important, even critical interdependencies between the different layers of the digital infrastructure and the so-called vertical stack that consists of, for example, chips, networks, clouds, applications, connected devices. And here, the colleagues stress that there are important geopolitical tensions and dependencies affecting all of these layers, and the European Commission will need to address them by building perhaps an independent so-called Eurostack. And this means coherently identifying critical technologies, assessing Europe's capabilities, and making sure that Europe is present in all key elements of the technological supply chain, while of course fostering and maintaining important international and strategic partnerships. Another recommendation here was for Europe to adopt digilateralism in its foreign and as a doctrine in its foreign and security policy. And this means recognizing that tech, cyber, information, digital spaces are critical to Europe's interest and must play a central role, a key role in its foreign policy strategies.
Thank you for sharing these insights. Now, to wrap up this interview, I wanted to ask you a question. You have stressed how collaborative this endeavor was, but I'm interested in knowing, what do you think is the most pressing priority for the new Commission in digital policy?
Well, this is a great question. So the new President of the United States has just been inaugurated, and based on some events over the past couple of weeks, it is quite clear that some decisions taken by the new US administration might pose serious challenges for European digital policymaking and lawmaking, in particular in the context of platform regulation. So we must have an urgent discussion and reflection about how to navigate these important upcoming complexities. I think Europe should really assert its position and continue aligning its digital policy making and lawmaking with its own values and priorities, even in the face of external pressures.
That's an excellent point. Thank you very much for joining us today, and congratulations on this successful endeavor.
Thank you so much, Julia.